Summary of A Vicious Game written by Blair. Chapter 1. In the dimly lit stables, a cold wave of despair crashed over Kira, drowning out her thoughts and suffocating her spirit. The flickering torches cast eerie shadows across the worn wooden walls, amplifying the weight of her failures and the burden of her regrets. Gerarda's piercing gaze bore into her with an intensity that mirrored the tumultuous storm raging within Kira's soul, while Riven's silent presence loomed like a specter of unspoken truths, casting a shadow over their tense exchange. The echoes of Gerarda's accusatory words reverberated in Kira's mind, a relentless reminder of her perceived shortcomings and the expectations she had failed to meet. The bitter taste of defeat lingered on her tongue, a constant reminder of the battles lost and the sacrifices made in vain. She had once harbored dreams of glory and triumph, but now they seemed like distant memories, fading into the darkness of despair. "Do you have a death wish?" Kira's voice trembled with suppressed anger and frustration as she struggled to maintain her composure in the face of Gerarda's relentless scrutiny. The memory of the icy water that had jolted her from her fitful slumber still lingered, a cruel reminder of her own vulnerability and fallibility. She had fought countless battles and stared death in the face more times than she could count, but now she found herself at a loss, grappling with the weight of her own inadequacy. Gerarda's expression remained impassive, her features etched with a mixture of disdain and disappointment. The weight of her disapproval hung heavy in the air, suffocating Kira with the burden of her own shortcomings. She had always strived to prove herself worthy of Gerarda's respect, but now it seemed as though she had fallen short once again. "This is pathetic, Kira." Gerarda's words cut through the silence like a knife, her tone dripping with contempt. Kira's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into the flesh of her palms as she struggled to contain the storm of emotions raging within her. She longed to lash out, to scream in rage against the injustice of it all, but she knew that it would only serve to further alienate her from those she cared about. As Gerarda continued to berate her, Kira's thoughts drifted back to a time when she had been filled with hope and determination, when she had believed that she could make a difference in the world. But now, faced with the harsh reality of her own limitations, she found herself questioning everything she had ever believed in. The memory of Hildegard, their mentor and friend, loomed large in her mind, a constant reminder of the promises she had made and the vows she had broken. "I knew where my burl was. It didn't move." Kira's voice was tinged with bitterness as she recounted her failed attempt to find solace in the embrace of oblivion. The taste of elvish wine lingered on her lips, a bitter reminder of the numbing embrace of alcohol that had become her only refuge in the face of overwhelming despair. As Gerarda pressed her for answers, Kira felt a surge of anger rising within her, a burning rage that threatened to consume her from within. She longed to lash out, to unleash the full force of her fury upon those who dared to question her resolve, but she knew that it would only serve to further isolate her from those she cared about. My fingers rubbed against something soft. I pulled the cork free from the skin and hung it over my mouth. A few droplets of rich elvish wine splattered against my tongue and the burning in my throat eased a little. Kira's voice was hoarse as she recounted the fleeting moment of relief she had found in the midst of her despair. The sensation of the wine sliding down her throat had offered a brief respite from the pain and anguish that threatened to consume her, if only for a moment. But even as the wine dulled the ache in her soul, it could not erase the scars of her past or the weight of her failures. She knew that she could never outrun the demons that haunted her, no matter how hard she tried. And so she continued to grapple with the darkness within her, seeking solace in the fleeting moments of respite that the wine provided. I let the wineskin drop to the floor of the stall and pulled myself up onto my feet. I slipped and whacked my entire body into the wall of roots. Kira's words were tinged with self-deprecation as she recounted her clumsy attempt to rise from the depths of despair. The physical pain of her collision with the wall served as a stark reminder of her own fallibility, a humbling testament to the fragility of her mortal form. But even as she stumbled and faltered, Kira refused to give in to despair. She knew that she had to keep fighting, no matter how hopeless the odds seemed, for there were still those who depended on her, still those who looked to her for guidance and leadership. And so she gathered her strength and pushed herself to her feet, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "If I'm such a disappointment, why are you here?" Kira's voice was laced with bitterness as she confronted Gerarda's relentless scrutiny. The weight of her disapproval hung heavy in the air, suffocating Kira with the burden of her own shortcomings. She had always strived to prove herself worthy of Gerarda's respect, but now it seemed as though she had fallen short once again. Gerarda's response was swift and cutting, her words like daggers aimed at Kira's heart. The shadow is digging a hole around the Myram with his pacing. The implication was clear, Kira's actions had consequences, and the consequences of her failure were already beginning to manifest. But even as Gerarda berated her, Kira refused to back down. She knew that she had to keep fighting, no matter how hopeless the odds seemed. For there were still those who depended on her, still those who looked to her for guidance and leadership. And so she gathered her strength and pushed herself to her feet, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the exchange between Kira and Gerarda grew more heated, Riven remained silent, his presence a silent reminder of the bonds that still held them together. But even as he stood by silently, Kira could sense the weight of his disappointment, a silent reproach for her perceived failures. She knew that she had let him down, just as she had let down so many others. But even as the guilt threatened to consume her, she refused to give in to despair. For there was still hope, however faint it may seem, and she would cling to it with every fiber of her being. As the tension between them reached its breaking point, Kira felt a surge of anger rising within her, a burning rage that threatened to consume her from within. She longed to lash out, to unleash the full force of her fury upon those who dared to question her resolve, but she knew that it would only serve to further alienate her from those she cared about. And so she swallowed her pride and forced herself to remain calm, determined to find a way forward in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As the conversation came to an end, Kira felt a sense of resignation wash over her, a bitter acceptance of the harsh realities that she faced. She knew that she could not change the past, nor could she undo the mistakes that she had made. But she refused to give up hope, for there was still a glimmer of light in the darkness, however faint it may seem. And so she gathered her strength and prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she would not be alone in her struggle, for even in the darkest of times, there were still those who stood by her side, ready to lend their support and their strength in the battle against despair. Chapter 2. Kira's journey through the labyrinthine corridors of Myram's branches was a solitary one. The grand hall echoed with the faint sounds of distant footsteps and murmured conversations as she descended the spiral staircase, her every movement a silent testament to the weight of her burdens. The stench of horse and sweat clung to her like a shroud, a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. As she made her way through the hall, Kira couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation amidst the bustling activity. Lunch had already been served, and the children were playing outside in the sunlight while their parents attended to their duties. The only ones left were the older Elverin, cooling their calves in the shallow pool, their boisterous chatter fading into the background as Kira passed by. She clenched her jaw and ignored their stares, the weight of their pity and disgust pressing down on her like a physical force. Once, her presence had commanded respect and fear, but those days were long gone. Now, she was little more than a shadow of her former self, haunted by the memories of her past and the mistakes she could never undo. Familiar voices drew her to the kitchens, and her stomach dropped. She hadn't expected to encounter anyone there so far from supper. Softening her steps, she slipped into the storeroom across the hall, the dim glow of the fey light casting long shadows on the shelves of supplies. Jars of nuts and crates of fresh berries lined the shelves, but there was no sign of the caskets of wine that usually covered the floor. Kira's heartbeat quickened as she rummaged through the shelves, searching desperately for anything that resembled wine. All she found were 2 dusty bottles, one empty and the other containing a foul liquid that made her recoil in disgust. With a frustrated growl, Kira grabbed the empty bottle and stormed into the kitchen. Lashrath stood by one of the giant hearths, his violet eyes full of laughter as he towered over Permith and Nikolai. "What did you do with it?" Kira bellowed, her voice raw with desperation. Permith looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and guilt. He tucked one of his tiny braids behind his ear in a transparent attempt to feign innocence, but Kira wasn't fooled. She knew they were hiding something, and she wasn't about to let them get away with it. You know exactly what I'm talking about, she spat, advancing on Permith like a predator stalking its prey. Lash stepped between them, his presence filling the room with an aura of danger. The fire in the hearth roared brighter, the flames dancing in his purple eyes. Kira knew he wouldn't hesitate to use his powers if needed, and she found herself hesitating. Nikolai, ever the opportunist, smoothed the non-existent wrinkles on his silk jacket and raised a manicured brow. Permith didn't hide the whine. I did, he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Kira's gaze flickered to Nikolai, her mind racing with possibilities. She could force the truth from him if she had to, but she knew that Lash would not let her get away with it. With a frustrated growl, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, the whispers of the Elverin in the hall following her like a shadow. Alone in her chambers, Kira collapsed onto the bed, her mind reeling with frustration and anger. She had hoped that confronting Nikolai would provide her with the answers she sought, but instead, she found herself no closer to the truth than before. The memories of her past failures weighed heavily on her mind, each one a reminder of the person she used to be. She had once been feared and respected, but now she was little more than a shadow of her former self, haunted by the ghosts of her past. With a heavy sigh, Kira reached for the leather pouch that hung from her belt. Inside, she found a vial of black liquid, the same elixir that Hildegard had given her to help with her cravings. Without hesitation, she uncorked the vial and drank deeply, the familiar taste of Winvra burning its way down her throat. As the elixir took hold, Kira felt the tension in her muscles begin to ease, the memories of her past failures fading into the background. She knew that she was only delaying the inevitable, but for now, it was enough to numb the pain and silence the voices that haunted her dreams. In the darkness of her chambers, Kira drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams haunted by the specter of her past. But even as she slept, a small part of her knew that the nightmares would return, as they always did, each one a painful reminder of the person she used to be. The sun had already set by the time Kira awoke, the room bathed in the soft glow of the fey light. She sat up slowly, her head throbbing with a dull ache as she tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. The events of the day flooded back to her in a rush, and she groaned inwardly at the thought of facing another night of restless dreams. But even as she reached for the leather pouch at her side, a small voice in the back of her mind urged her to resist. For a moment, she hesitated, the weight of her cravings warring with her desire for clarity and control. But then, with a sigh of resignation, she reached for the vial of black liquid and uncorked it, the familiar scent of Winvra filling the air. As she drank, the tension in her muscles began to ease, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. For a brief moment, the nightmares seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a sense of peace and serenity, but even as she savored the feeling, she knew that it was only temporary. The elixir could numb her pain and silence her fears, but it could never truly erase the memories that haunted her dreams. With a heavy heart, Kira lay back down on the bed, the weight of her burdens pressing down on her like a leaden blanket. In the darkness of her chambers, she closed her eyes and prayed for a moment of respite, knowing that when the sun rose again, she would once more be forced to confront the demons that lurked within her own mind.